I now give the floor to His Excellency Sergey Lavrov, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, allow me to express to you, as a State Councillor and Minister for Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China, our gratitude for organizing today's debate. The theme of upholding multilateralism and strengthening the UN-centered international system is undoubtedly more pertinent than ever and deserves the attention on a constant basis of the UN Security Council. The world is at a turning point in its development. The coronavirus pandemic has proved to be a serious challenge for absolutely everyone. Our normal way of life has undergone fundamental changes, although positive trends have also been seen thanks to the mass application and administering of COVID vaccines. The long-term and, as it were, delayed effects of the crisis are still hard to predict. The pandemic broke out in what was far from an ideal world. A growth in international tension, the exacerbation of regional conflicts, and the emergence of cross-border threats and challenges have become signs of the times. The entire architecture of global governance that was created following the end of the Second World War is being sorely tested. It is evident that prospects for the sustainable and predictable development of the international community are directly linked to our ability to find effective solutions to common problems and our readiness to demonstrate collective leadership in the interests of genuine multilateralism. Russia, like the majority of states, believes that this work needs to be done exclusively on the basis of universally recognized norms of international law. The key platform for pulling these efforts together should still be the United Nations, which is the backbone of the modern world order, where all independent states are represented. Today, its unique legitimacy and its unique capabilities are particularly in demand. The core postulate of international law in the UN Charter, and those postulates have been tested by time. Russia calls on all states to unconditionally adhere to the purposes and principles of the Charter when forming their foreign policy, ensuring respect for sovereign equality of states, non-interference in their internal affairs, the settlement of disputes through political and diplomatic means, and a rejection of the threat of force or the use of force. This is particularly important at the current stage in the complex formation of a multipolar system of international relations. Given the objective growth of new centers of economic, financial development and political influence, it's necessary to preserve the international legal basis to draw a resilient balance of interests that corresponds to these new realities. Unfortunately, not all of our partners are guided by the imperative of working honestly to establish genuine multilateral cooperation. They've come up against the impossibility of advancing their unilateral or bloc priorities within the UN, and leading Western countries are now trying to roll back the process of establishing a multipolar, polycentric world and try to restrain the course of history. This includes the concept of the so-called rules-based order, a concept that was thought up as a way to replace international law. I don't need to recall that international law is already made up of a set of rules, but these are rules that were agreed at universal platforms and which reflect the consensus or broadest possible consent. The aim of the West is to pit these joint collegiate efforts of the international community against other rules that are developed in closed, non-inclusive formats and which are then imposed on everyone else. We believe that these actions in circumvention of the UN are harmful and they aim to usurp the decision-making process whilst claiming to have global application. This list also includes the well-known idea of convening a summit of democracies that the American administration is calling for. Creating a new special interests club on an openly ideologized basis could further exacerbate international tension and draw dividing lines in the world, a world which needs a unifying agenda now more than ever. And incidentally, the list of democracies that are being invited to this summit will inevitably be drawn up by the United States themselves. Another allegedly global leadership initiative is being advocated in circumvention of the UN, the French and German Alliance for Multilateralism. Now, strengthening multilateralism should be considered specifically within the United Nations, but Berlin and Paris think otherwise, and they are issuing their own joint document on the subject of the European Union as the cornerstone of the multilateral system, and are advancing the European Council as the central role of the European Union and European institutions in advancing multilateralism. You might say that's immodest, but the EU does not think so when they declare their exclusiveness. And incidentally, during discussions with Western colleagues, we propose that we discuss the state of democracy not just within states, but also in the international arena. But when we do so, they seem to lose interest in the discussion. As part of this alliance of multilateralists that I referred to, more and more initiatives are being declared about the creation of so-called partnerships, narrow partnerships, and yet partnerships on those same matters that are already discussed in the UN or the specialized agencies in its system. Examples of this are the so-called calls for security in cyberspace. 65 countries participate in that. The call for respect for international humanitarian law, 43 countries. The partnership in support of freedom of information and democracy, slightly more than 30 countries participate in that. And there are other initiatives as well. These demonstrate the genuine relationship, the real relationship that the UN has to multilateralism in the UN. Multilateralism, which in the West is seen not as something that's been produced by a universal format to find solutions, but rather it's something they see in terms of their claims to come up with a system that everyone needs to agree to. Another example of this method is the West's practice of unlawful unilateral sanctions that are introduced without any international legal basis, with the sole aim of punishing regimes that have fallen out of favor or to take opponents out of the game. During the pandemic, these restrictions have significantly reduced the ability of a whole host of developing countries to combat the spread of the virus. Despite the call of the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, to suspend these sanctions in the context of the pandemic, in the majority of cases, we are only seeing them being tightened. We believe that these steps to impose totalitarianism in global affairs are unacceptable, but they are being used more and more widely by our Western colleagues, chiefly the European Union, the United States, and other allies, rejecting all the principles of democracy and multilateralism in the international arena. They say that the world should be the way that they want it to be, and otherwise they'll punish them. Western actors also aren't ashamed to say that the main aim of global politics should be to combat attempts by Russia and China to change the rules-based order. These statements were made the other day following the ministerial meeting of the G7 in London. That is to say that this change in concepts has already taken place. The West is no longer worried by the concepts of international law, and now they will simply fulfill and implement their rules and the rules-based order that they have established. And the American representative did not worry about saying that it was the United States and the United Kingdom that were chiefly behind this. I'm saying all of this not to whip up confrontation and rhetoric and make accusations. I'm simply listing facts. And if we are all actually saying that we're in favor of multilateralism, then let's honestly together try to find ways to establish it justly without attempts to prove anyone's primacy or to undermine anyone's rights. We are convinced that this approach of upholding multilateralism and the UN-centered system will guide the actions of the Secretary General and his team. We are convinced that recognizing modern realities of a mutually linked world means that what we need today is an honest partnership and cooperation between all states on a pragmatic, ideology-free and depoliticized basis. That's the only way to improve the atmosphere in the world and to ensure the predictable development of humanity, particularly when we're talking about global challenges such as the fight against terrorism and combating WMDs, climate change, new infectious diseases, ensuring human rights, starting with the very most basic one, the most important one, the right to life. And I agree with Secretary of State Blinken, who recently underscored that these global challenges affecting the lives of our citizens cannot be tackled by one state alone, not even the United States. A key role in launching a frank, direct dialogue about the most acute problems of the modern age should be played by the permanent members of the UN Security Council, who, in accordance with the Charter, bear particular responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. President Putin proposed the convening of a summit of the leaders of the P5, and we hope that this idea will become a reality once the epidemiological situation around the world has been normalized. In conclusion, I would like to underscore that the UN, as the main international platform, must keep pace with changes in the international arena. The organization needs to steadily adapt to changing conditions, and any changes need to fully respect the division of labor between the main charter organs of the UN and enjoy the support of all member states. At every stage of this change, a measure of our actions should be genuinely increasing the effectiveness of the UN. Russia is ready to support constructive cooperation with all partners that support these approaches in the interest of strengthening the authority and unleashing the full potential of the UN as the genuine center of multilateralism. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Minister Lavrov. As a permanent member of the UN Security Council, Russia has always been an important force for maintaining international peace and security. Particularly given the current circumstances, Russia has made many calls to maintain international law, the Charter of the United Nations, to choose solidarity over division. This is of a real practical significance and is a real manifestation of multilateralism.